as a intervention of anything that's written from experience.
Stuart Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to start actually with a comment. Actually, I think this is the first time that I can recall in my time in Parliament that there's no advisors present, and I thought, I'm not quite sure what the reason would be for that. Perhaps we have an all-knowing minister, or perhaps they're trying to tell us something, but I'll leave that with you. I think I'd just like to respond to Dr Webb's contribution. He made a comment about my SOP and that insurers might not agree with it. Well, I'm pretty sure he was sat on the Select Committee which heard all the evidence, and they were universal in their praise of the MOU arrangement and did want it in legislation. So I'm not quite sure where he might get that view from, and I'm sure he would appreciate that in legislation you don't have to please everybody. If you tried to please everybody, you wouldn't get any legislation passed. So I don't think that's not a very valid point. And he did say that legislation is not always the answer, making the point that really an MOU might be sufficient and we could go out on an ad hoc basis from time to time and sign up these MOUs. Well, that's not what the insurance industry wants. It's not actually what the policyholders want either. They want a seamless operation of EQC. They want to be able to, and the insurers, they want to know when they've had a natural disaster, they've got enough on their plate without having to worry about other arrangements to be made. And I'm very concerned that that he would take that attitude. But I want to now turn to the caps, and so lifting the cap from $100,000 to $150,000. It's absolutely obvious that that lift is required in the cap, and we saw quite a bit of work done through the Select Committee process, because there was an original recommendation in the work that the previous government did that the cap be lifted to $200,000. But when we looked at the shifting the risk, because effectively you're shifting the risk between EQC and the insurance industry, and if you put too much on the insurance industry, then they're getting a free ride. If you put too much on the other way around, EQC's getting a free ride. You know, it's a balancing exercise. And on balance, $150,000 was the best, and the removal of the contents insurance as absolutely also the right thing to do. And I think everybody would recognise that who's had an EQC claim, that when you deal with an insurance company, they are dealing with these things all the time. EQC is not set up to be, as I said before, have a standing army to react to these sorts of issues where insurance companies are dealing with claims every day. It's not their first rodeo. They know what to look for and how to get through these processes smoothly with the best outcome for everyone. But I do think that Dr Webb made a valid point that legislation isn't always the answer. And so my question to the Minister and the Chair is, can the caps and the building amount per square metre not be in regulations, rather than having to go into legislation every so often to try and catch up on the inflation component when that could be done by legislation, by regulation. We saw a bill yesterday on medicinal cannabis giving carte blanche ability in the regulation-making power. Surely a simple thing like lifting the cap from 100 to 150 and then at some point in the future lifting it up again as inflation moves on, and the building amount, more importantly, per square metre, changing as inflation dictates over time. You would think that would be far simpler to be managed in a regulation making power situation, that rather than having to go through the costly and timely procedure, which will always be late. You won't do it ahead of time. Parliament doesn't legislate well ahead of time, so we will always be behind. Whereas using regulations, that would be a far simpler, more reactive process, and we wouldn't end up getting things so out of whack over time as we do as we have done with this, because it's quite some time since that occurred.
Okay, the question is that Stuart